So many people are like, this is what I thought I was going to do, but it ended up going this way, or I was doing this and then randomly I got pulled in this direction. And so the cogency that we all like to imbue our career descriptions with usually comes in hindsight, where we're like, oh, well, this was always the through line. And this is like why I was always building to this moment. But life is a lot more random than that. And I think that people should give themselves a pass if they are not building, brick on brick on brick on brick towards something really specific, because you might also miss out on something random that leads to something even more random, which is really the thing you were supposed to be doing.
I'm super excited to have Notion sponsoring us today. Notion is used by thousands of startups around the world as their connected workspace for everything from engineering specs to new hire onboarding to fundraising. If you're a startup, you can get 6 months free of Notion with unlimited AI, which is valued at over $6,000. You can access the limitless power of AI right inside of Notion to build and scale your company and team with one tool. So head over to notion.com/startups and select Next Play in the drop-down partner list, and then enter the code NEXTPLAY at the end of the form. Hey everyone, welcome to the Next Play podcast. I'm super excited to have Camille here with us today. Camille is a partner and head of marketing at XYZ Venture Capital, where she invests in product-led growth companies, creator tools, and more. Prior, she was the first marketing hire at Notion, where she helped build out its global brand strategy and team. With deep roots in content marketing in particular, she was the first editor of First Round Review for First Round Capital. She managed communications for Tesla and started as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. She has her BA in history, but truly majored in the Stanford Daily. I'm really honored to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited about this. I'm very honored.
Yeah, and I think the best part about this is today's episode is actually sponsored by Notion.
Fantastic. Couldn't be better. Very apt.
Exactly. And for those who haven't heard the podcast yet, we're interviewing great folks who have made career moves recently to talk about their decision-making, behind the scenes of their process. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a topic I'm passionate about, and definitely you and I have talked a lot about it over the years. So this is wonderful.
So I want to start off with your time at Notion. How did you end up there as the first marketing leader?
Yeah, this was quite serendipitous. I had the good fortune of being at First Round Capital for a number of years. One of the things that I did there was start a publication called First Round Review. And as part of my time there, I got to also advise a number of the companies in the portfolio. And one of those companies happened to be Notion very early on, around 2013, 2014. And a young whippersnapper named Ivan Zhao, who came into our office and said that he would love some thoughts around telling the Notion story. And this was sort of in its earliest first incarnation. So I got introduced to it really early. And then 4+ years later, when I decided to leave First Round and I was looking for my next chapter, Ivan remembered me and reached out and gave me the chance to run marketing, which at that time felt like a pretty big bet for someone to be placing on me, and I will be forever grateful. But I guess that the overarching lesson there is that you just never know who along the path is going to make an instrumental difference in your life. So always keep folks in mind, keep them close.
Yeah, and I'm forever grateful as well, because I ended up joining because of you. So
a chain of serendipity.
Exactly.
I feel like it's always interesting, these forks in the road where it could have just very easily gone a different way, and then who knows how different things would be.
So what was the interview process like for joining Notion?
It was incredibly informal in a way that now looking back on it, I can't quite believe that it went like that. So he reached out to me, said, hey, obviously, remember you from your work at First Round, would love to talk to you about potentially working at Notion. There was no role attached to it. And then when I met him in person, he characterized the role as a storytelling role. So we need a storyteller here at Notion. And that was really appealing to me. I loved the fact that that was going to be kind of the lead ethos of the marketing strategy that he wanted to build, was around telling a really strong story. And honestly, he just asked me to create a Notion doc with my ideas in terms of, here are the things that we should tackle, and here is what I think would work in terms of brand approach, differentiation. I wrote that doc. I took it very seriously. And then in the room, as we were going through it together, he was like, so do you want to come do this? I know that since then, obviously, the interview process at Notion has become quite a bit more formalized, but that was just like a wonderful preview of that period of time in the company's life.
I'm so curious to see that doc. I feel like you probably did so many of the things in there.
It's floating around somewhere in the Notion ether. But really did characterize, a lot of people asked me what the onboarding was like at the point when I joined, because it was just 10 people. I was number 11 who joined in a much smaller office than they have today. And the onboarding was honestly Ivan asking me which type of chair I would like. There were 3 different chairs to choose from. One very high design, as one might imagine if they know Ivan and Notion's design aesthetic. And then was like, great, you sit there. And that was the full onboarding.
I love that. Usually they talk about onboarding being getting a new laptop, but here it's the chair. That's what matters.
It's the chair. And I would say that that's still a great part of Notion's lore.
Totally. And was it hard going from working in venture capital to being at this tiny startup?
I mean, it was to a great degree, because just my goaling was completely different. At First Round, I was writing this publication, I was helping the firm market itself, but truly the goal was to expand our brand awareness so that we got the chance to work with a subset of who we believe to be the most extraordinary founders out of that audience. The goal was not to just maximize top of funnel and achieve ubiquity in terms of how many people were interacting with First Round. At Notion, that absolutely was the case, where we wanted as many people as humanly possible all around the world to hear about Notion, try it out, get hooked on it, start using it meaningfully in their lives. And so that was an entirely different muscle, an entirely different skill set. I actually had to come to terms with the fact that content was not going to be the forefront of the marketing strategy, as you know, since you were the very first person who joined me on the team. It was very clear from the start that Notion's unfair advantage was going to be community and all of the incredible user love that was mobilized around the product. And so having to truly be like, content's not going to be the first thing that we focus on was also an adjustment.
I've come across First Round Review many, many times, and it was such an iconic piece of the tech world. So you did something so special there.
It was a real privilege to write that for as long as I did, because I just got to meet so many incredible people, and my job was literally to sit there as they gave me their advice and wisdom.
Amazing. What do you think you learned from them?
Oh, gosh. I mean, so many things. And you know this, but just, I would say that the things that are maybe unusual that people did not normally associate with them is perhaps patience and the ideal of being incredibly thoughtful and sitting with ideas. People usually think of folks who are working in this way as being quick, working at a breakneck pace, making decisions on the fly. And of course, that is a huge component of it. But when you do have the space and the time, and you know that this decision being made is big enough, like really being thoughtful and thinking through all the permutations of how things might go. And that was a way of working that I hadn't necessarily been exposed to that degree. And I am so grateful for that, because it's certainly imbued everything I've done since then.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that Ivan has been working on Notion for 12, 13 years now.
Yeah, and then
on the same company.
Persevere through like some pretty significant challenges to even get to the starting line. Anybody who's familiar with that story about the initial run at Notion having to be wound down because of tech stack challenges, and then spun back up with the help of a loan from his mom, and him and Simon really just putting their heads down and building most of the core of the product. It's just an incredible story.
Yeah, it's such an unbelievable story. Like, I can't even imagine taking a loan from my mom.
I know. And the fact that she was like, okay, here you go, you get it. But I mean, I hope that she is a significant stakeholder.
Very likely.
Early angel.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious, what do you think you learned about yourself while you were at Notion?
Oh my goodness. And I'm so curious. I don't want to like pose too many questions back to you, Ben, although it's like exactly my instinct to do so. I mean, I think that we both learned how to stay calm when things were really tough. Like Ivan really values a great deal of stoicism, and that was something that I wasn't entirely sold on as a strength, because I am an emotion first person, and I really, I like to lead with how I'm feeling, how others are feeling, all of that. But to be able to weather and endure some of the toughest moments, or moments where the chaos was really high momentum, really key in order to stay even, stay calm. I was actually reflecting on this with a friend who is right now just entering into or embarking on being the first hire at a company. And the things that would have like completely thrown me off for like days, maybe even weeks, by the end of my tenure at Notion, it was like, oh, well, this is just all in a morning's work. Or I would like very easily advise people how to handle a certain situation by the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we could probably spend the rest of this podcast just talking about what you learned, and me as well. But yes, we have a lot more to talk about. I want to hear about your experience at first round and your next play now, and much more.
Yeah.
Yes. But before we move on, I'm curious about what your fondest memories are at Notion. Are there one or two things that stand out to you from your time there?
I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't absolutely start with so many of the times that you and I spent together, particularly around seeing the community take off. One thing that I'll just like call out to be very specific on it is when we used to induct people into the Slack instance that really served as our ambassador community. We would always encourage people to introduce themselves. But of course, we gave like very cursory instructions, like, what's your name? Where are you from? And so many people wrote these like long lyrical tributes to how Notion had changed their life. And I remember there was one member who came in from Venezuela who really did say like, Notion has saved my life on multiple occasions in various ways. Just reading those every single time, like literally every other month when we would do sort of a inductee moment, just really reminded me constantly of why we were doing this, why this was important. The fact that this piece of productivity software was playing an outsized role in people's lives and that it had real emotional heft for them. It was just really, those are among my best memories for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the crazy part is people joining the ambassador program still talk that way about Notion. I'm lucky enough to be a recent ambassador. I joined a few months ago, and I see people joining, and I'm just amazed that there's continues to be so many unbelievable stories of people who really just want to be a part of the extended Notion family. It's really inspiring and special.
You know, some of the best times also were just like being there late at night, which I know doesn't sound really fun, perhaps on face value, but in one of our offices, 930 Alabama, which was the second office, we didn't have any overhead lighting at all. And for a while, we didn't have any even lamps in the office. And so it would just get darker and darker and darker. And we would all be like working there by the glow of our screens. And one of our colleagues, Sarah Lim Slim, she had like an actual headlamp that she was like wearing in the office. It just was like this real sense of camaraderie of like, we are all in this together and we all care very deeply about this. And those are some great memories as well.
Yeah, it makes me think about, I've been seeing this calm company trend on Twitter, all these people who want to start calm companies with very zen, working from home and growing slowly and no meetings. I feel like Notion was really close to that, except with hyper growth in terms of revenue and users, but also just a very calm atmosphere, very few meetings, kind of was able to straddle both worlds, which I think was also so special and unique.
I agree. Yeah, it really felt almost like, the way that Notion gives people a blank canvas on which they can project themselves and anything that they need to do. The company at that time felt like such a beautiful, clean canvas. It was all like having tea together and, taking our shoes off at the door and putting on our work slippers. And it felt like a family, to be honest. And I know that there's a lot of balking at that word and people are like, you shouldn't be a family at work. You should be a high performance sports team. But I honestly think that family feel early on gave us even more strength and power in a way because we were so committed to each other.
Yeah. And I was also always so struck by the life stories, where every week one person on the team would share and just go really deep on their entire life story. I don't even connect with my friends that way. So it was just
Totally.
seeing coworkers share.
I mean, I remember this one story that was like so powerful, and people would share like very personal things that they would not necessarily share, like you said, with even their closest friends. And I remember this was probably when we were like 25 people. We surrounded the storyteller in this huge group hug and just like kind of like actually like held each other. And yeah, it was a very, very special place. It still is, but those memories I will cherish forever.
Yeah, I loved I think someone put together a Notion doc inside of Notion's Notion with the greatest memories and greatest experiences. And I'm sure that's in there, but it's so cool having this log of being able to go back in time and see all these really special moments.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, we could probably spend the rest of the episode talking about this as well.
Make sure we're moving on to the topics you have in mind.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it as well. It's really fun.
Yes,
reminiscing. So you spent an amazing few years at Notion. I mean, I know you accomplished so much, and the team was so thankful to have you there. You brought on so many amazing people. Was it hard leaving the company?
I mean, thank you for saying that, and back at you. It was exceptionally hard to leave. And I don't know how many people actually talk about this. You can tell me since you've done a number of these. But it was probably the biggest emotional decision of my life, which sounds interesting because it's a professional work decision. But it certainly took me a long time to make the decision. Even after I had it, took me a long time speaking with Ivan to actually enact the decision. But it really felt like I was like leaving my home to a large extent. It was like leaving a place that I considered to be my home. And it felt like it was going to mean changing everything in order to do it. It was very emotional. Tears were shed. And I think for anyone listening to this that feels similarly or has similar experiences, that is okay. And you are valid.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate hearing that. And, as someone who was one of your reports, I felt very similarly, and I think a lot of people who worked with you felt that way too. It was a very hard experience for us all, and we can all look forward to working together in the future. That's certainly something that I know myself and a lot of other people look forward to at some point. It's a small world.
At some point, we'll figure it out how to get the band back together. But what I didn't realize is that when I did make the decision, not only was it hard to have that discussion with Ivan, particularly because he's a very compelling talker-outer of things. Like he's very good at talking people out of things. But once it was really, decided, having to have all those conversations with you and Andrea and Nate and so everybody on the team, it was just like death by 1,000 cuts, to be honest. Yeah. I am glad that I made the decision because I had been there so early on and we had been there and observed a lot of the same things. I didn't want to burn out on the job. Like truly that's what it came down to is I wanted to, and I felt that I owed Notion the strongest finish possible. And my team just like the absolute full focus and as much energy as I could provide. And I didn't want that to be compromised in any way while I was still there. So that was why I thought it was time.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being open about that. I think a lot of people can feel similar ways, especially in fast-growing early-stage companies. So it's helpful to know that it happens and it's okay to move on to a certain point when it feels right.
Yeah, and to also be sure that you are like giving enough notice and being really thoughtful and planful around your departure so that everybody who you are so invested in feels like it's been really cogent and everybody feels set up for success.
I'm curious, are there things you remember that you did that were really helpful in setting up everyone for success?
That is a really good question. I remember doing a lot of documentation, as a lot of no-tinos are wont to do. We're very documentation first people. So there was a lot of just trying to externalize my brain. Even before doing the work of that, kind of outlining it, being like, what are all the things that my brain contains that I need to figure out how to either parcel out and place with another human being or have live somewhere digitally. So I would say that would probably be my advice for anybody who's going through this experience is to first do the exercise of writing a big list of things, almost like chapters in a book of your experience, before trying to set in on actually doing the detailed documentation of what it is that you carry institutionally.
Yeah, it's great advice, and it reminds me of your legendary launch checklist. I guess this is a different kind of checklist, but one of my fondest memories was certainly your epic documents before we would launch a new product, new feature, or release of everything that needed to be done. And I can imagine that this document was similar, but more about yourself and the work that needed to be passed on.
It was very similar. I love that Ivan referred to it for a long time as Camille style checklist.
I still think it's that way.
And to all the people listening who are like, but didn't she use databases? Didn't she use advanced features of these databases for checklists? No, I did not. I used the to-do block because I thought it was like really satisfying for us all to be like checking things off together in unison.
And that's okay. Yeah, I think it's totally okay. That's the beauty of Notion. I use to-dos for my own personal Notion workspace for my own personal to-dos, and I don't use like some crazy database. I think a lot of people think I do, but I just want something simple.
I still do, but yeah, now I'm in this new job and I just made my first checklist of this sort, and my boss was like, oh wow. It's a checklist.
Wow. I'm just curious what the latest Camille checklist looks like.
Very similar.
Yeah. But before we jump into your newest job, I'm curious, like after Notion, I mean, I know you spent some time traveling, investing. What was that time like for you?
Oh gosh. It was wonderful to a certain degree, obviously. Like I can't complain about spending 2 months in Italy. So, and finally being present, I would say one thing that when people would ask me, why are you leaving or what are you looking forward to do after your departure, I would say, I really want to be present with some people in my life that I haven't been able to be as present with while I was so focused on the job. And that felt really truthful to me. And so after leaving, one of the first things I did was literally travel to all of the cities that there was no reason for me to go to before that my friends had moved to during the pandemic. So Denver, Austin, Seattle, etc. Met a lot of brand new babies and all of that, and just really reminded myself and reconnected with wanting to be there for people and be really, really present for people in their lives. I think I've carried that into how I wanted future opportunities in my career to look, is that I still wanted to be able to be substantial in my friends' lives. And then the flip side of all of this, which maybe, again, I'm going to be very transparent because I hope this podcast will be helpful, but I honestly felt a loss of identity. Like I felt like something that I had aligned myself with, which was like almost the lead of when I would introduce myself. I would always associate myself with Notion and what I did there and the people I got to work with. All of a sudden that had vaporized. And I didn't really know how to position myself in the world. I had all the usual concerns. And I've actually spoken recently with folks who feel similarly about not being relevant anymore, people in the ecosystem forgetting who I am, people not understanding what skill set I truly emerged with. All of those things I would just like churn and think about in between the time that I left and then actually thinking about getting back to work. All of that was sort of a jumble in my mind.
Yeah. And, for what it's worth, I talk to a lot of people about this as well. And it's so common, people probably don't talk about this publicly, but all those feelings of loss of identity and not knowing kind of where to fit in, it's really hard. And it's so true.
I think that a lot of us probably feel when we step out of something that we felt characterized us or our abilities, like anxiety. I think that the word that I would apply to it is the anxiety that we don't necessarily have that calling card anymore.
Yeah, no, totally hear you on that. And,
yeah.
And is there anything that you wish you had done more of when you kind of spent this period of traveling and exploring?
Such a good question. I honestly wish that I would have started earlier on my journey of speaking to people more informally and more informationally about all of the opportunities that existed out there. When I really got in the mindset of wanting to go back to work, I kind of phased things out. This was at the beginning of 2023, where I thought to myself, okay, well, I will spend 1 month sort of doing exploration, top of funnel, like talking to all of the most brilliant people I know, seeing what they think is interesting, who they think is interesting. Then I'll spend a month actually decisioning and thinking through what it is I want to do. And then the third month, I will really get my head around joining somewhere. So I had kind of planned it out or gamed it out. I did not have nearly enough time in that month at the beginning to really explore and discover the full breadth of what it is that I could be involved in the world. One of my most illuminating conversations was with this woman, Sandy Spicer, who was the CEO of IDEO for a very long time. And she was like, oh yeah, I'm also in this period where I am discovering what it is I want to do next, etc. She had been at IDEO for 20 years. And some of the things that she said were just like, I'd really love to help this government in South America think through how they're going to invest money in education. Or I want to go talk to these people about an entirely new strategy for renewable energy. And I was like, man, those are different than the things I'm considering. But also how exciting and how inspiring. And that was sort of toward the end of my discovery phase. And so any advice that I would have here is start that earlier. There's no reason that you have to box in like, oh, I'm thinking about work again. You can just meet really exciting people all along your path and ask them what they think is going to be amazing. And then also, I always try to end my conversations with them with who else is like you, who I should talk to. And can you introduce me? Well, one of our colleagues did gift me an Xbox on my way out of the door at Notion. Francisco. Hi, Francisco. And so perhaps I could have played less Red Dead Redemption. I could have. I didn't, and I'm happy with the time I invested. Actually, that is the advice. I'm going to spin this in this direction. I'm happy that I did that because when you do take the time off work, I highly, highly recommend carving out time to do nothing. Like all of my friends who have immediately then felt the pressure to figure out what is next, I always ask them, do you have the ability to do nothing for at least some set stretch of time? And if you do, I think it's the most important mental reset that you can give yourself.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And I wish I listened to that myself. I think it's harder for some people than others possibly, but I think it's so important. And, I hear that on repeat from really brilliant people I talk to, like how important it is to have the time to reset.
Yeah, you kind of feel your mind unspool. And this happened to me, but like you get that first really creative idea where you're like, oh, this is something interesting I could try, or there's something here that I could shape. And when you have that first like really legitimately creative idea, it usually is born out of just like allowing your mind to run and giving yourself that space. And it feels really, really good to feel that sort of return to you.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to kind of rewind a little earlier in your career and talk a little bit more about your time at Tesla and First Round. Can you maybe share a little bit about how you ended up at Tesla and what was the company like at that point?
Oh gosh, yes. Very early on. This was pretty early Tesla, although they already had 1,000 employees. They did not yet have the Model S out there in the world. I had been writing about green technology for a couple of years at a publication called VentureBeat. And this is back when VentureBeat had a bunch of folks who have now gone on to be in sort of like the investing firmament, like MG Siegler and Kim Mai Cutler and Eric Eldon. And my job was to be the green technology writer / editor. So I was constantly writing about batteries and wind power and all kinds of stuff. But suddenly this company Tesla became 80% of what I wrote about, just because it was the most visible, the sexiest, the most interesting of the green technology plays that were out there at the time. And so I was constantly interacting with their communications team. And then a couple of times I might have scooped some news that they weren't thrilled that I had found out about. Let's say. So I was a little bit of like pecking at them, here and there. One day I got a phone call from Ricardo Reyes, who was running the comms and marketing team at the time, and asked if I would be interested in a comms role there because there'd be some interesting symmetry to coming in-house and then interacting with people like me, given how knowledgeable I already was about Tesla. It was interesting. I mean, it felt like somebody reaching out a hand and saying, come see a totally different part of the world, a different vantage point of the world. And also, there's this guy, Elon, and maybe you would get to sit next to him sometimes and help him figure out what the story should be. And not a lot of 26-year-olds get that type of opportunity. So that's how I ended up there. And there was always a running joke that I was hired in order to diffuse me as a journalistic sort of threat hanging around the hoop. But yeah, ended up starting there. That's really where I got into content marketing for brands, because I would run their newsletter and I did a lot of their blog editorial, but also got to speak to journalists, got to sit next to Elon as he spoke to journalists. And it was a really, really interesting sort of deep end of the pool learning experience.
Super cool. Do you have any particular memories from working with Elon?
One of my favorite things is that I was so early on in the story of Model S that we literally had this like aluminum skeleton that we would bring around to things like the American Auto Show in Detroit, or like to the floor of a Las Vegas casino. And we would tell people about this incredible car that was going to exist, definitely. And there was a time at CES in Las Vegas, the Consumer Electronics Show, that I was being interviewed by a journalist. And this car that we were showing off was such a model that things were literally falling off of it, like in the interior. The sun visor would just fall off, or the knobs on the radio would just come off. And so I was talking to this reporter from TechCrunch and literally trying to casually hold the sun visor up as I was like, this is a natural pose in which to be talking to you about all of the features of the car. So it was always kind of like wow, this is really a startup, even though it's also a major auto manufacturer and we are trying to change the world in some big ways.
That's amazing. I'm sure you have a lot of very interesting stories from your time there.
Yes, and obviously Model S has gone on to be an incredibly well-manufactured car, but that was certainly like, this is a prototype.
Yeah. Is there anything you wish you had done less of during that exploration phase? And so how did you transition then from spending time working on comms at Tesla to then joining First Round?
I left Tesla to go work at a nonprofit called Kiva Microfunds, and they were very focused on microfinance around the world in 68 different countries and making loans accessible, truly accessible, with lower interest rates available for people who were starting entrepreneurial businesses around the world. And that's where I fell in love with content marketing, because I got to run the blog and tell all these stories about the change that these loans were driving for people. So I was doing that for the 2 interceding years between Tesla and First Round. And then honestly, I feel like my advice here is so bad in terms of job transitions, because I keep saying that there's like this deus ex machina thing that just happens out of the blue. But truly, and the message here is still to like cherish your relationships all along your path. But somebody who worked with me at the Stanford Daily, he was a senior when I was a freshman, knew my boss at First Round, who I went to go work for. So I truly did get an email out of the blue being like, hey, First Round Capital is looking for a writer. They think they want to do some writing over there. I'm not really sure what it's about, but do you want to meet my friend Brett Burson and take a walk with him? And I was like, sure, fine. Brett and I took a walk together and he offered me the job like literally that same day to go work at First Round. We had such a really fun, robust conversation about content marketing and storytelling and differentiation in a VC market that had yet to really delve into content. I just feel so fortunate that for some reason out there in the world, that series of events happened that got me over there.
Yeah. And, the other thing I'm noticing here is people offering you jobs the same day they meet you. I think there's a trend here. People really love working with you. So
at least I'm credible in the room,
Yeah. And I mean, you've worked on so many different types of, companies over the years, like electric cars and microfinance and venture capital and B2B/B2C tool making software. Like, it's pretty remarkable how many things you've worked on. Is that just like a function of your curiosity or how do you think that's happened?
I think it does speak to how circuitous life is in general. Like, I know at these Next Play dinners, because I was lucky enough to go to one of them, so many people are like, this is what I thought I was going to do, but it ended up going this way, or I was doing this and then randomly I got pulled in this direction. And so the cogency that we all like to imbue our career descriptions with usually comes in hindsight, where we're like, oh, well, this was always the through line. And this is like why I was always building to this moment. But life is a lot more random than that. And I think that people should give themselves a pass if they are not building, brick on brick on brick on brick towards something really specific, because you might also miss out on something random that leads to something even more random, which is really the thing you were supposed to be doing. I think the reason that I've ended up with such a broad experience and versatile topics is because I have allowed myself to be caught by the wind in a few ways and open to learning about those things.
The magic of serendipity, I feel like that really has been a theme across your career, and that's so special.
Telling people to be open to that serendipity, and that when you are introduced to somebody and they don't necessarily slot neatly into your theory of what the arc is going to be, like, don't automatically say like, oh, they're not going to play a major role in my life, or I'm not going to invest the time or the energy. Who knows, truly? Like, there's so many people you've now introduced me to that I would have never met otherwise, who are rich parts of my life. You just have to follow what is feeling right for you at the time.
Yeah. If someone reaches out for, to go on a walk, like, why not? Grab coffee. You never know. I mean, that's
absolutely. Be like, really... I have this question that people make fun of me for, because I'll say it to both really close friends, as you know, and then also people who I've just met, where I'm like, tell me all about yourself. As just like an opener. And it always kind of like softens people, and they're like, oh, I could choose anything now to say.
Yeah, maybe I should start the podcast that way.
Great all about yourself.
I should do that next time.
Yeah. People will be like,
where do I start?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I know we only have a few minutes left, and I really want to talk about your latest play, which is joining XYZ Ventures. Can you tell me a little bit about how that happened and what prompted you to become a full-time investor?
Yeah, this is the first time that I've had the opportunity to lead deals ever in my career. And that is a big deal for me, honestly, no pun intended, because I think having explored venture, starting with being a journalist and then first round, I was told so many times that it just wasn't going to be in the cards for me, and that making the jump from marketing to venture in particular was very challenging. So I honestly allowed that light to be dimmed for me for a while, and thought to myself, like, okay, well, I love the idea of venture. I love the variety that it provides. I love the fact that my network is exploded with just incredible, highly motivated, brilliant people. I want to be close to venture. So maybe I'll be an operating partner. I am very grateful to the folks at XYZ for seeing the opportunity for me to be a real asset when it comes to not just evaluating companies that have to do with marketing or communications or community or brand, but also having the insight about product-led growth from my time at Notion, or having the insight into climate companies from my time as a journalist in a way that would be valuable to the investing process. So I was fortunate enough to meet the XYZ crew because my now partner, Chauncey Hamilton, worked with me at First Round. Again, connections coming back around. And she and I just stayed friends and have now been friends for 11 years. And she was kind enough to sort of stretch out her hand and be like, I've been having an extraordinary time at this firm. It's a very, very small firm. We're going after big, ambitious topics and investments. Would you be interested? And then her partner, my now partner, Ross Fubini, honestly taking a chance on me. So that's also sort of like something that is a pattern in my life. Like, Ivan took a chance on me to run marketing, even though I had only been a storyteller. Ross taking a chance on me to be an investor, even though I had been a marketing person. So being able to stretch into things.
Well, I have no doubt you're going to hit it out of the park, and I'm super excited to see the companies you invest in. And I think any founder would be lucky to have you on board. I mean, really lucky. I know that as having worked with you.
That's very kind. Yeah. Thank you. I'm really excited to also bring like all of the marketing experience I've had, both good and bad, to bear and help people navigate that, no matter which partner they're working with at XYZ. Very, very excited. And in particular, just really focused on PLG still being something that is exciting in the ecosystem, something that I'm really strongly betting on as being responsible for some of the breakout generational companies that we're seeing right now. So those are always founders that I am in particular really engaged with.
That's amazing. And for folks who are considering going from the operator side to the investor side, is there anything you would maybe tell them as they're considering that career change?
Yeah. I mean, I would have a conversation with yourself around how important variety is to you versus having the ability to focus on one thing and make that the thing that you are learning about, writing about, talking about constantly. Like I lived, ate, and breathed productivity for 4 years, basically. And that was wonderful. I think that my journalist DNA really loves the variety and being exposed to things, like lots of things at a really rapid pace. So that's one consideration, because at VC that will absolutely be the case. And then also what stage you like to operate at, which I know sounds very specific, but I don't know how you think about yourself, Ben, but I know that I'm a very 0 to 1 sort of person, maybe 1 to 10 if you squint. And that is the time period where I feel like I can make the most impact, and I really enjoy the work of carving a lot of things out of the ice. And knowing what type of person you are along those lines, because in venture, you get to kind of play in a sandbox in a field of folks who are at that stage perpetually. And so I'm really excited that XYZ operates at pre-seed and seed so that I can be part of a lot of those 0 to 1 stories.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And, I guess kind of taking a step back, like for anyone kind of early in their career, just looking to succeed, what would you tell them, someone early?
Yeah, I'm going to borrow some advice from somebody who is in this category, our mutual friend and colleague, Maya Bakir, who works at Notion. And she is still early career. I don't think that she would mind me saying that. But she's done such a wonderful job of cultivating meaningful relationships with people who are further down the road, like myself, like so many of our mutual friends, who she very actively and without any reservation asks for their perspective and really tries to understand their decision-making processes as she thinks about them for herself. And so I would advise anybody who's sort of at that point in their life to think about the people who are down the road in areas where you are excited to learn more, and just don't be shy about asking if you can learn more about them and see if it's a relationship that can be ongoing.
I love that. I'm a big Maya fan here as well. So I think it's definitely a well-deserved shout out.
Yes, on the path to a brilliant career.
Totally. She'll be on the podcast soon enough.
Yes.
Well, I think we're out of time here. I have had so much fun talking to you, and I've learned a ton. I know everyone here listening will probably feel the same way, and I'm just really grateful for you taking the time.
Likewise, so much wisdom from so many great people that you are unlocking. Thank you so much for having me here.
I'm super excited to have Notion sponsoring us today. Notion is used by thousands of startups around the world as their connected workspace for everything from engineering specs to new hire onboarding to fundraising. If you're a startup, you can get 6 months free of Notion with unlimited AI, which is valued at over $6,000. You can access the limitless power of AI right inside of Notion to build and scale your company and team with one tool. So head over to notion.com/startups and select Next Play in the drop-down partner list, and then enter the code NEXTPLAY at the end of the form.